Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having us here. We're very happy to be at the festival. So my name is Sebastian. I'm a sound artist, and I came up with this idea of sonic games a few years ago. This is Clément.
Yeah, hello everybody. Oh, sorry.
Peut-être
Ouais, je vais peut-être faire attention. I will move this way.
Oh non, plutôt là.
This way, if you can see me. I'm a researcher, musicologist. I'm working at IRCAM in the analysis of musical practices team, which is a humanity team in this very high-tech institution, which is IRCAM. And I was involved in this sonic game project, first as an ethnographer, and then as one of the game designers of this project. And we did this project with also Diane Blondeau, Clément Lebrun, and Emeric Stam. And here is the outline of our presentation. So first, we'll introduce the different ways there are to cash out this idea of musical games and explain how we wanted to position our own sonic games within these various possibilities. Then we'll discuss some of the main challenges and issues we have to face in designing these sonic games. And third, we'll share with you the result of a survey study we did, aiming at understanding some of the aesthetic processes at play in the appreciation of this kind of musical games. So we'll start with something very extremely obvious, which is that musical games can be seen as hybrids between games and music, but this very idea already entails some tensions. There are tensions at an ontological level. Is the presence of sound necessary or contingent? There are tensions at an aesthetical level. Is the focus of aesthetic attention mainly on musical sounds, or is it on the adjunctive experiences that arise from playing the game? But also at a broadly socio-anthropological level. Is this mainly a participatory affair or a presentational affair? But there is also another ambivalence in musical games that appear if we scrutinize more precisely this idea of hybrid art forms. And the American philosopher Gerald Levinson wrote 40 years ago, almost now, a very interesting paper on hybrid art forms in which he make a distinction between two types of hybrids, what he calls transformational hybrids and what he calls synthetic hybrids. And here is what he writes in his essay. In a transformational hybrid art form, the arts combined do not contribute to the results in roughly the same degree. A transformational hybrid of A with B is not halfway between A and B. It is basically A transformed in a B-ish direction. A good example of this sort of hybrid is kinetic sculpture. Kinetic sculpture can be seen as an ordinary sculpture modified in the direction of dance. It is not an equal fusion of the two, but rather an incorporation of some of the special or distinctive characteristics of dance into what remains recognizably sculpture through in an extended sense. Contrast this with synthetic cases, for example, concrete poetry or shaped canvas. In a synthetic hybrid of A and B, the result can be described as a non-standard A with B-ish feature, so for example, a pictorial poem, or with roughly equal claim as a non-standard B with A-ish feature, so for example, a poem-like picture. And it seems to us that musical games are maybe rather an example of this kind of transformational hybrid art form rather than a synthetic hybrid art form. And if indeed musical games are this kind of transformational hybrids, then they can be of two kinds. They can be either musical compositions that have some game-like features, or they can be full-fledged games that rely on a sonic medium. And to us, it will seem that many forms of musical games that can be found in contemporary musical practice can be seen rather as the former than as the latter. So our idea with our own sonic games was to try to start with games rather than music. And of course, this kind of statement raises the question of what does make a game a game. So here is our working definition. We do not claim that those are necessary and sufficient conditions. We didn't work enough to claim anything like that. So this is only our working definition. That was our starting point in trying to design an hybrid that will try to transform games into the direction of sonic and musical art forms rather than the opposite. So of course, for a game, you need some structural features, winning conditions that are triggered by specific game states. The player behavior needs to be goal-oriented and rule-governed, and the unfolding of the game is indeterminate, either because there are choices, or it can just also because of some randomness in the game. There is also an important sociological ingredient to games regarding who can play a game. A game can generally be learned and mastered on its own grounds without requiring a pre-existing domain-specific expertise. I think this is an important point for us. And finally, there is a normative component also to game. A good game is supposed to be fun to play. And I will switch to Sébastian.
Thank you. So we discovered what we really wanted to do as we started working together and exploring some early games. First thing, our Sonic games should behave like games, following the definition we proposed in the previous slide. And we made also sure to explore different types of games: collaborative versus competitive, strategic versus skillfulness, static players versus players in motion. Then we all agreed that sound should be at the core of the rules of our games. They must have a function in the game. Of course, our Sonic games are meant to be played but also be watched and listened. In other words, the pleasure of the spectator should be as great as that of the player, and vice versa. So here is our Sonic game library. So I'll give you a very short description of each game. The first we designed is called NIM. It is a Sonic translation of the strategy game of the same name. The game begins with all the instrumentalists, different from the players, playing together. They form two separate lines. The two players take turns silencing one, two, or three instrumentalists of one line or the other. The winner is the one who reaches silence. Then there's Sonar. It's a competitive game. Two teams of 2 or 3 players play against each other. They stand back to back. They listen in turn to the sound produced by the others. And a team wins when it manages to reproduce the sound and spatial proposal produced by the other team. Then there's Maze. It's a collaborative game where players must find the exit. The maze has 2 levels, and in addition to the walls against which the sounds will bump and bring the players back to the starting point, the sounds can fall to the lower level, called the oubliette in French, or dungeon in English. Sorry. Another game is called Werewolves and Villagers, the one we played last night. It's a competitive game. Each night, the players play the corresponding vocal sound. The villagers, they sing a pitch, and the werewolves make a noisy sound. Each day, based on what they learn during the night, they move on the checkboard in order to, depending on who they are, either transform the villagers into werewolves, or catch the werewolves, or move away from the wolf pack. Target is a competitive game based on the principle of rock, paper, and scissors. Each player plays with his 2 circle neighbors. The outcome of these duels determines whether the player advances to a circle closer to the center or goes back to a more distant circle. The winner is the first to reach the center of the target. Action Object is a collaborative game. At the beginning of the game, the players are given an object that does not allow them to perform their action. The collective goal is for everyone to retrieve, based on a barter system and within a limited number of moves, the instrument corresponding to their action. And we have Topographies. It's a collaborative puzzle game. Starting from a random position, players, they move along a colored graph, aiming to connect with other members of their sound family. A connection occurs when 2 players are 1 edge apart. When 2 players of the same family are connected, they play their sound. The game is successful when all the families are connected.
So now I would like to reflect a bit on the challenges we had to face in the process of designing those Sonic games. So the first challenge was how to have non-musicians playing Sonic games, and here we made 2 decisions. First decision was in terms of how the sound is produced during the games. So we relied either on very simple vocal sounds, like in the wearables we did yesterday, and we also relied on a selection of objects that are easy to use and make somehow interesting sounds in and of themselves. So some papers, tubes. Here is a very short video. be able to try some of its instruments in the Sonar game we'll be doing next. And the second decision was that players' actions, choices, or strategies should never rely on instrumental virtuosity. So the ability to perform a complex set of actions in a given order and within a given time frame. We didn't want that. Okay, now this idea of creating sonic games that can be played by everyone could be, at least to a certain extent, in tension with the idea of having games that rely essentially on sound and on its manipulation. And to be fair, the idea of having games that are sonic in a very strong sense, and not just games that happen to make sound, was only partially fulfilled in our project. So here we use mainly 3 design strategies to inject sound in our games. The first strategy is simply to sonify a game that could also be played in a purely non-sonic way. So for example, in topographies, players start making sound when they are directly connected to one another through a line on the floor and stop playing as soon as they are not connected anymore. And of course, while this is an efficient strategy to have people make some sounds, this does not meet our requirement of having games that are essentially sonic. So here is a short video of topographies. You could easily play a version of this game without any sound at all. The second strategy is maybe a bit better in that regard. It is to use sound as an index, as telling you something on the player who is making that sound that is relevant in order to win the game. That's the idea of using sound as an indexical resource. So for example, in Werewolves and Villagers, the game we played yesterday, players can identify the secret roles of the other players through the sound they make. Or in Sonar, the game we're going to play in a few minutes, players must localize where their opponents are in the game space only based on the sounds they are making. And the third strategy is precisely to make sound the strategic medium of the game, meaning that the issue of the game will depend on the choice of sound that is made by the players. And again, this is obviously in tension with our no virtuosity requirement. The more sonic choices you give to the players, the more their musical abilities will make a difference. So for now, we just have one example in that direction, which is a target game, this kind of rock, paper, scissors game. So it's a very low threshold to call something strategic, right? Okay, so our third challenge was to design full-fledged games that are fun to play, as we said earlier, rather than musical compositions, and thus to ensure that our games were interesting to play as games first. So first aspect for that was to ensure that the game were fair or balanced, and this was particularly important in the design of a competitive and asymmetric game such as Werewolves and Villagers. For example, a very simple but still problematic issue was to decide the proportion between Werewolves and Villagers at the start of the game. So how many wolves you want, how many villagers, for each team to have an equal chance to win. So what we did is to rerun many simulations of the game through a computer model of the game to find the sweet spot. And so with a given combination, we could decide, okay, we need that many werewolves and that many villagers. So we did stuff like that for many of our games. Another aspect was to ensure that our games allowed for strategic behaviors, that players could make choices that had a significant impact on the game outcome. So for example, in Sonar, the game we're going to play, to allow for various strategies, we selected an instrumentarium with which players could create sonic outputs that raise distinct issues for the opposing team. So sounds that are more or less difficult to distinguish from one another, or sounds that are more or less difficult to locate within the space. We'll see what's going to happen next. And in Werewolves and Villagers, to make the game more strategic, we made the choice that the villagers could endorse 2 distinct strategies in order to win the game. So either they can simply flee away from the werewolves, or they can try to coordinate with one another to block the werewolves' progression. So they have some kind of relevant choice they can make. And finally, it was also very important to make the games challenging, but again, not in a musical sense, only in a gaming sense, and to be able to modulate the difficulty levels of the game so they would neither feel trivial nor impossible to play. So in the maze, the game we're going to play tomorrow, a possibility to make the game more challenging was adding more levels, so introducing dungeons and then towers, and it can really be like a big three-dimensional maze, and it's very easy to lose yourself in the maze. And in the topography, the game you show a short video of before, we try to imagine different patterns on the floors that are more and more complex to solve. And sometimes when a pattern was too easy, players got to solve it too quickly, we made some decision to erase some lines to make the game even more challenging. And the last challenge, but it's not the more trivial one, we wanted to design games that are also interesting to attend to, at least to some extent. And remember that we are lacking one of the main resources found in sports or game played at a professional level, that are the player's virtuosity, expertise, technical ability. We can't have that since we're doing these games with non-musicians. So here, again, we relied on two main design strategies. The first strategy was that for each game, we paired an explicit gaming goal. So you have to turn the villagers into variables, for example, that's an explicit gaming goal, with implicit sonic goals. So for example, for variables, the implicit sonic goals, what the game should make, it is a progressive transformation of a composite sonic material into an homogeneous sonic material. Or for topographies, what the game should do, if it's played right, is an aleatoric montage of sounds that emerge and disappear in a sporadic way. And the second strategy was to find ways to favor empathy and perspective taking. And we did that by signaling through lines and color the game's goals and rules to the audience, and also by making the players' decision processes visible through their actions and motions. And here is a short video of the target game in which you will see how the output of the game is signaled through motions and light. This kind of very simple visualization strategy. So very quickly, because I'm almost at the end of the time, but I just wanted to share the results of the survey study. It's a very small survey study because it's only on those Sonic games. So what we did is that after each session and for each game, we asked our players to answer a few questions on a 7-point Likert scale. Here are the questions. I can read them maybe. So to which extent did you feel involved during the game? So question about involvement. To which extent did you feel that you had to take into consideration the other player's actions in order to play the game? Question about interaction. To which extent did you feel that you had to make some choices during the game? Question about agency. To which extent were you satisfied when you won the game? Question about accomplishment. To which extent did you feel the game to be challenging? Question about the challenge level. To which extent the game was fun to play? Okay. To which extent did you feel that you had an influence on the overall sound during the game? And to which extent did you feel that you could sonically express yourself during the game? And audience members were also asked to answer 3 questions for each one of our 7 games. To which extent did you find the game interesting to attend to? To which extent did you put yourself in the player's shoes while attending the game? And to which extent did you enjoy the sonic result of the game? And at the end of the survey, there was the last question regarding their gaming expertise. At which frequency do you play games? So I won't enter too much into the detail of what we found, and we'll focus only on 2 main results that we have for now. So first question worth addressing is whether gaming expertise had an influence on audience appreciation. And here we found that audience members who were used to play games used a wider range of ratings than audience members who did not play games. So you see the first graph on the left is a non-gamer audience, and the graph below is a gamer ratings. And you see that much more varied. It means that gamers were sensitive to aspects of our games to which non-gamers were non-sensitive. And we also found that overall, gamers reported higher ratings than non-gamers. And all of this tells us that, at least to some degree, our Sonic games were actually games. And second result I want to share with you, which is maybe more relevant for everyone, was to investigate the relation between the audience appreciation and the player's experience. So I will spare you the statistical data of the linear regression we did, but what we found is that the audience was more likely to report high ratings of game appreciation and high ratings of empathy when the players had reported high ratings of agency and interactivity. And we also found that the audience was more likely to report high ratings of sonic absorption when the players had reported high ratings of agency and sonic influence. So in other words, in a nutshell, the more agency was reported by the player, whether a ludic agency or a sonic agency, the more enjoyable the games were for the audience, which is quite reassuring, right? If we think of games as forms of agency. So it seems that the aesthetic pleasure of the audience is also highly dependent on attending to the very agential experiences of the players. And Sebastian. Yeah.
So when we performed in Saint-Nazaire last November, our show ended with topographies for a big number of players. And the players, they played small, fragile instruments like the sheet metal that is shaken, the metallophone, the paper that is struck. And the audience consisted, for the most part, of people who know very little or nothing about experimental music. But thanks to the tension of the game, it was quite beautiful to see the audience being so captivated by these minimalist soundscapes and choreographies. And another thing is that so far few musicians have participated as players in the project. In the first rehearsals, the players are a bit puzzled when we ask them to rub stones together or shake a light filter. But as the practice evolves, starting with learning the rules and then producing the right actions to win, attention shifts to sound production, gestures become more precise and listening becomes more refined. So enabling greater awareness of sound was not one of our primary goals, but I can see that our sonic games could have a positive effect in this regard with both performers and spectators, and I'm very happy with that. Thank you.